What in the holy hell is going on with Destiny 2? As an outsider, I, being devoid of skill, know that Destiny 2 exists and has been insanely influential in the live service gaming space, but I lack the critical knowledge for what the game entails. I first played the OG Destiny in 2014 on a PlayStation 4, I then returned as I convinced my parents to let me build a computer instead. I played that original game for a few hours, but remember nothing from it outside of some random interjections from the classic Angry Joe review. My initial experience with Destiny 2 was fairly similar. Forsaken was on sale, so I picked it up, but only put in 1 or 2 hours on battle.net. It came to Steam a few years later as a free-to-play title, and I tried to pick it up once more, but didn't continue with it any further as I was just not interested in another live service title at that time. However, it is no longer 10 years later. We are here, and the conclusion of the Light and Darkness saga arrives in just a few short months. In quite the paradox, I've heard both so much and yet so little about it, so I decided to pick up Destiny 2 and figure out what is going on for myself. Now, without any further ado, here is my Destiny 2 new player free-to-play experience. After starting up the game, a notification lets me know that crossplay is enabled and that my Steam platform name has been assigned to a Bungie name. Very cool. A few pop-ups later, and we enter character creation. Our first option is the most important, and that's for us to choose our class. The available 3 are Titan, Hunter, and Warlock. These are the same 3 classes I remember existing many years ago, and while they haven't changed in name, there are so many subclass options that have been added to make each of the builds vary under each class. I picked Hunter for this new character at the start, but I do switch on over to the Warlock after a bit. Besides our class, we are also able to customize our character's physical appearance as well. For our body, we have the option of 3 different races: humans, which need no introduction, Awoken, which are basically space humans, and Exo, which are basically robot humans. None of the races have any unique or differentiating modifiers, but that's to be expected. We aren't able to modify the body any further. Facial customization is just as limited. There's a couple of face and hair presets, but no sliders to adjust any fine details. If your face actually mattered in this game, this would be an issue, but since it's covered by a mask for most of the game, this doesn't really bother me. Once character creation ends, a cutscene begins. The Bungie logo appears before cutting into an establishing shot of Mars. A shuttle lands and some explorers make some steps out in what we are told is the present day. They look around all somberly and continue the trek forward. Multiple locations are montage cut in until they reach their destination. Rain falls as they look up towards a giant white planet-sized sphere in the sky. The title drops, and another cutscene begins. This one starts off with a voice filling us in on the origin of the universe by telling us that things are made out of light and darkness. Wow. The giant planet-sized sphere from earlier is known as the Traveler because it traveled to our universe from somewhere else. The more important part is that its influence helped to usher in the golden age of humanity. However, this age didn't last forever, as the Traveler was being pursued by an enemy. With the loss of its strength, the Traveler pushed back this enemy, which created the Ghost. These tiny creatures revive fallen warriors in order to create Lightbringers, individuals which are able to wield a portion of the Traveler's power. After acquiring the Traveler's power, these Lightbringers built the last city underneath the Traveler and vowed to protect it forever. Of course, many forces in the universe oppose our existence, but our current greatest adversary is the Voice in the Darkness, who has been revealed as the Witness. The visuals of the cutscene were pretty neat to look at, but the exposition provided didn't really mean anything to me at this moment. Our eyelids open up and reveal to us a ghost which has revived us. We are currently in an old Russian spaceport known as the Cosmodrome, and it's currently quarantined due to being under control of the Fallen. Although now alive, we aren't safe, which ushers in the first mission. Although the Cosmodrome isn't safe in general, this area which we were revived in is free of any other inhabitants. So I take this time to adjust some settings and can finally record through game capture instead of display. Most of the settings in this game seem pretty standard, but I won't really be able to get a good feeling about what's missing until much later. The FOV slider is pretty much a requirement these days, but for some reason it only goes up to 105 instead of 110. That's a fairly minor nitpick though. Also, since I have an ultra-wide monitor, this video is in widescreen. And since I'm recording footage and this isn't a competitive FPS, I've maxed out the settings. Please like and subscribe so one day I can afford a better GPU than a 3060 Ti. Thanks. Although there is a waypoint for us to follow, I ignore it and take a look behind us instead. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be looking at, but these rusted cars stop trying to cross this broken bridge aids in some environmental storytelling. Sure, we have no idea what could have happened here, but the mystery of some sort of cataclysmic event entices the player to figure out what happened here. Instead of following the waypoint, I decided to run around the open area and see if I can escape the bounds of our spawn location. I tried for a bit, but I wasn't able to find any other way out of here that didn't involve me dying. Eventually, we followed the advice of our ghost and make our way into the warehouse. So far, the general movement of the Guardian feels pretty tight and responsive. The difference between walking and running is fairly noticeable, but the speed of both is on the slower side. Luckily, this is remedied in the future through mobility upgrades and abilities. The regular jumping is also a little bit floaty, but I think that's intentional, especially since this is a space game. A little bit further into the warehouse and we run into this room with harsh lighting. It helps to illuminate this game's pleasant visual aesthetic in a more dreadful light. In fact, as we continue in even further, we witness a creature crawling up some discarded metal sheets and pipe. The warning provided to us by our ghost only aids in making the overall tone more akin to a horror game than an action game. Also, I tried to look past the metal obstructions and up into the empty space where the creature escaped into, but I have no idea where it could have gone from here. That's right, I just pointed out a minor map discrepancy. That might as well make this game a 0 out of 10. We walk into an open room where a ghost examines the environment and turns on the light, allowing us to progress further. Of course, this action notifies the enemies of our presence, and thus we must prepare for combat. We pick up a conveniently placed weapon and prepare to face some baddies. I open up the menu and start to read through some of the UI, but cut my losses and hope that the tutorial would cover it soon. After turning the corner, we face two wretches as our first enemy encounter. They go down without a hitch, but the true discovery was in finding out that I could actually hipfire without having to aim down sights. CS is all hipfire, while Siege is the exact opposite, so it was important to me to figure out that I could use a hybrid style when shooting in this game. The tutorial then grants us access to our abilities as we run into the next encounter zone. We gain access to a grenade skill, a melee skill, and a combat ability. Each of these vary by class, subclass, and can then be customized even further within. I don't get to any of that customization for a while, but it helps that the starting abilities are fairly standard actions imbued with some space magic in order to streamline the initial experience. Do note that I will continue to mess with the keybinds for a while until I found a set that I was comfortable with. So if you ever see conflicting hotkeys on the screen, that's why. Our ghost mentions how the Fallen are space pirate scavengers, but that's all we learn of them for now. We open up this loot cache and receive our second weapon. This is an energy weapon and thus goes into our second slot. It also requires special ammo called special ammo. While I use them to take out some basic trash mobs, the real use case for them comes when you encounter an armored opponent, designated by a special health bar. We push forwards and find ourselves outside the warehouse and into the divide, still in the Cosmodrome. However, this doesn't give us any room to breathe. Instead, a Fallen raiding party has arrived and we must push back their assault. Of course, I first waste a bunch of time running around and exploring the location first, allowing myself to pick up an epic purple helmet first. I make my way towards the battleground and start neutralizing some of the surrounding enemies. We complete the quest objective, but there's still a walker to take care of. The game doesn't stop though. Shaw Han introduces himself by the means of an emergency message. Some event compromised his vanguard operation and separated him from his strike team. Our ghost lets us know that this means that they are from the last city. Since he couldn't respond back to our message, something was interfering with his signal. Although we don't know what was, we do know a good approximation of his location based on this message. While the conversation continues, we still had to deal with the threat of this walker. This mini-boss is the first introduction of unique mechanics to enemies, and it's a pretty standard one. We just have to shoot one of the legs until it falters. This will then expose the walker's core, allowing us to deal critical damage and emerge victorious. Apparently though, this wasn't a part of the Fallen raiding party, as this event resets immediately upon completion. That's probably for the new players to always have something to fight. I did find this barely hidden Scorch Cannon, and that allows us to deal massive damage, making the fight this time much faster. The loot rewards were inconsequential, so I didn't bother to fight it a third time and continued the track towards the signal instead. We make our way towards another combat zone until a cutscene triggers. Shaw starts to explain the situation before realizing that we've only just now been revived. Our character talks and says that we made it this far, only making it right that we would be able to help. Shaw wasn't against our help anyways and complies. This is just some basic setup, but the fact that really caught me off guard was when our Guardian talked. For some reason, I just assumed that we would be a silent protag due to this being a live service game and not talking so far. But apparently, we do at least have our personality defined in-game for us. Our first order of operations here is to take the Fallen off of some scanner thing. We let out our ghost and let it investigate the antenna. It finds out that these devices were scrambling our signals and were made out of stolen city tech. This then begins a classic Destiny 1 horde mode style mission, where we wait for our ghost to restore the signal while we take down the assaulting fallen. Our ghost fixes the interference and restores the signals. However, there are still no other fireteam signals being emitted. To Shaw, this indicates an emergency situation and that things must have gone really bad for the two of them to have split up. This of course leads into our next objective, where we must find Maeve. We don't have any vehicles available to us quite yet, thus we have to waste a bunch of time running to the opposite side of this area's map. Our ghost does fill us in on some minor details along the way, but nothing I need to bring up. Luckily, we stumble across some heavy pikes that were conveniently abandoned by their riders. The initial seconds of riding the pike threw me off, as it doesn't control the same as your character. However, I realized that the vehicle follows your mouse's trajectory, and that allowed me to regain the control in order to reach our waypoint. I inspect the device, and our ghost informs us of how it is encrypted and requires us to go retrieve some access codes. Conveniently for us, some of the fallen in the area have access to the access codes, letting us gain access to the access codes. After taking down the servitor, we obtain its arc charge and plug it into the device that disables the shields and grants our ghost the codes. We repeat this activity 3 times at 3 different locations before heading back to the barrier. We disable the barrier and learn that Shaw's theory was indeed correct. The fallen were apparently trying to keep the hive contained. We head inside but are unable to continue down the main path as some out-of-control arc charges blocks our way. This takes us down a side route in hopes of either finding an alternative path forward or to solve the arc discharge problem. This is where we are introduced to the basic enemies of the hive. They act like normal trash mobs, but are instead focused on swarming towards your direction in order to overwhelm you with numbers, staying true to their name. As we continue, we enter a zone where the darkness suppresses the ghost's light. The fact that this is possible makes me want to ask a lot of questions. For gameplay purposes, this prevents instant respawns and forces you to take your time in clearing the area in order to not die and have to restart. In lore, I can only begin to assume that this means if we die, we aren't able to be revived by our ghost and requires another guardian to resurrect us. I also have no idea how the darkness is able to be spread, or manipulated, much like the light, but that's more general lore questions. This zone contains some stronger hive monsters with the existence of the knights and acolytes. However, this is an FPS game, so the solution to these problems are quite obvious. We find Maeve being attacked by the hive's Nevoda air spawn. Or air spawn. I'm not sure how you pronounce that exactly, and don't even know what an air spawn is. Context clues lead me to assume that the air is some sort of elite hive creature. At least we finally encounter a named enemy. However, we don't actually confront her here, and instead check on Maeve's ghost. We inspect it only to learn that it's broken. We inform Shaw of our discovery, and learn that he was also too late when it came to finding Cass. The fact that ghosts can be destroyed in the first place is another interesting addition to the lore, and only makes me question how the power of the ghosts work even further. From the beginning anime cutscene, we learn that ghosts are spawns of the Traveler, but that doesn't really explain anything, because we don't know how the Traveler is able to do any of this, what the Traveler is, blah 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 blah, you know the whole 9 yards by now. Dialogue from the conversation from our ghost and Shaw lets us know that Nevoda was a hive wizard, indicating to us her enemy type, and that we'll probably encounter more of them in the future. With the mission ending in a successful failure, we travel back and meet up with Shaw. However, before we manage to fast travel back though, the mission ends and spawns us in this locked room. I'm able to shoot some mobs, but it's impossible to leave this room. In fact, the game keeps on shoving the fast travel pop-up on our screen. I'm including this part because it makes no sense on why they don't just force the fast travel for us. Like, why even design this area in the first place? This is a pretty minor point to point out in the grand scheme of things, but pointing out flaws in a product is funny, so you better over-exaggerate this problem in the comments down below right after you like this video. We return back to Shaw and mess around with some chair physics as we receive a message from the tower asking for some backup. Instead, I decided to take a short break before returning to my gaming session. However, as I selected my character, I encountered a 10-minute black loading screen. The world's shortest loading time, by the way. What is happening? What is taking so long to load? Hello? 10 minutes of loading on my PCI Gen 3 SSD. Sure, it's not at Gen 4 speeds, but this game should require those anyways. Also, my 980 EVO isn't my 7200 RPM WD Blue hard drive. I seriously thought the game was glitched or broken and was just waiting for the game to eventually crash before I continued on with my session.
My mind seeks our next threat. But I still
Literal, I can't believe it was loading this entire time. That's crazy. It's actually crazy. We load in, and I think this time has to do with us being spawned in at the tower instead of where we last left off. Last left off. Yeesh, that's hard to say. I'm not exactly sure why I decided to spawn us here in the tower instead of wherever we last left off, but it doesn't matter because we fast travel back and still have missions complete in the Cosmodrome. We return back to Shaw, who expresses his remorse for the deaths of Cass and Maeve. However, they did know the risk when taking on their positions as guardians, and thus the best way to honor them is to finish their job. However, before we can exact revenge on Novoda, we have to deal with the overflowing arc energy from the superconductor that blocks our path. This introduces us to a screen where Shaw is gifting us a weapon, and it's filled with tons of flavor text. I was going to read all of the text I encountered out loud for you losers, but after actually reading one out, I decided that y'all probably don't care. It also slows down the pace of this video even further, so instead of padding this video out with supplemental content, I'm padding it out with a conversation about how I chose not to waste your time, except in a different manner. This is also where we are introduced to bounties. These are just dailies and or weeklies depending on their context. I pick up Maeve's key and encounter a pop-up telling me to buy Lightfall. I'm actually surprised that it took this long to get one of these bad boys. With our key, I open up Maeve's stash, which is located behind us, and receive an exotic power weapon, the Tractor Cannon. This weapon is property of the Ishtar collection, and it comes with a warning of how the gravity propulsor beam can cause serious injuries. Flavor text aside, the real bonus of this weapon being exotic is its intrinsic trait. This weapon in particular emits a powerful impulse that pushes enemies away, suppresses their abilities, and makes them more vulnerable to all incoming damage. Aside from being a shotgun, its use case to me seems like you start off an encounter with some pumps from the cannon before mowing down the rest of the mobs. I did not ever utilize this tactic because, if I'm being honest, none of the enemies have nearly enough health, nor do they deal enough damage to ever be a threat. I'm literally just holding down mouse 1 in every encounter without thinking too much about my positioning. The game being too easy is actually a problem for quite a while. In fact, all of the new light quests is way too easy. It only really gets tough when I put myself in situations that I shouldn't be in. This might be a general game power creep issue, because if the health of the trash mobs hasn't gone up, but our light/power level has, then of course the damage is going to be too high. However, I don't know if that's what's actually causing this issue, or if they just made this section easy for new players. But in my opinion, it's way too easy for far too long as this isn't your first ever first-person shooter. In any case, I complete all of the bounties first before continuing on with the main story.
Sounds good.
I don't think you need to see me do some dailies, and I don't really have anything to say about them. Patrols are just go to this location, interact with this object, and then kill a bunch of things. The others are about killing a certain type of enemy or killing them with a certain move, skill, or gun. It's pretty standard affair, for now. I got an epic chest armor piece, and this is where I decided to take a look into the armor mod system. At least right now, the most important factor seems to be how your basic stats are distributed. Pieces of armor have random rolled stats, and through managing the energy, you can add some bonus stats to whatever you need. Each of the classes also has a main stat that you should focus on. For Hunter, mobility seems pretty important, and for the Warlock, resilience is pretty important as well. However, resilience and recovery seem to be most important for every class in general, regardless of whatever else you might need. Aside from the stat upgrades, there are also armor mods that slightly adjust gameplay. Some of the most impactful ones of these are ones that grant armor charges. These are their own resource, and apparently are much more important to manage later, but barely matter to me now. Without a proper guide, reading through all of the abilities and knowing which mods to get is insanely overwhelming. I just kept my focus on the pure numbers at first, and then clicked on whatever mod I had the energy left for after that. This managed to keep it fairly streamlined and simple for now. We meet back with Shaw, and he discusses the plan with us on how to disable the superconductor. He rewards us with the legendary scout rifle Nightwatch before we set off to complete our task. We find ourselves back at the warehouse in order to access an array that will disable the arc discharge blocking our path forward. Novoda, however, is still in the area, and we need to take care of her spawn as we clear the way through. This is where the game formally introduces the mechanic of finishers. If an enemy is below a certain health threshold, then a finisher will kill them instantly. This doesn't really matter for the trash mobs, but it makes taking care of certain bigger shielded foes a little bit faster. Certain abilities can also trigger off the finishers, which can then further impact the flow of gameplay. It also finally explained those glowing dots that were above the enemies. I'm not sure why the finisher section wasn't included with the rest of the ability tutorials. I ended up binding the finisher on a random ass key since I didn't know what the point of it was. We find our path forward, block to a power outage, and defend ourselves against the enemies as they attack us in waves. Wow, what an original mission design. The warehouse opens back up and exposes us to the sunlight. This is where we witness a high ritual taking place. Our ghost wants us to pursue the Shadow Rift. In addition to the main quest activity, the rest of the map is littered by a constant non-stop barrage of various enemies. After purging the rift, some crystals spawn around the perimeter. We destroy them, and Shaw lets us know that whatever we're doing is working. Once complete, the next order of operations is to defeat a bunch of the attacking hive before making our way towards the era. I keep on saying era, I mean to say array, but I just say era. Go listen to the new album, by the way. Shaw's actions are working, but he's still stuck in the subsystems and requires us to reboot the systems ourselves in order to get him enough power. We find the control panel, and our ghost takes care of the hacking for us. The respawning is restricted banner also helpfully clues us into the fact that shit is about to go down. And that threat is only exemplified by the interference blocking Shaw's signal. With this, we are left to our own when it comes to defending the control room. The fight was pretty easy. There were not nearly enough enemies and they didn't do enough damage, but whatever. We return back to camp and Shaw is actually headed to the superconductor by himself. He requests for us to head to the last city. Of course, we can't let him do this by himself and try to find a second key. Luckily, Shaw gave us a sparrow, and that manages to cut down on a lot of travel time between locations. Eventually, we find the Vendetta banner and start the next quest. I do have to say that this is where I encountered the most issues with the Diamond Quest tracker. It would disappear from the screen half the time and wouldn't show me where to go exactly. But I did discover that there is an arrow around the radar in the upper left corner that shows you where to go, and that's basically solved a lot of my issues. This public event ended up glitching and resulted in an insane amount of frame dropping orc charges. The most annoying part, however, is how they clogged up a bunch of UI space whenever I would whip around the camera. After picking up the codes, we head over to the Moth Yards. This area is full of ionized superconductor energy and allows our ghost to amplify its signal in order to contact Shaw. We make our way back into the warehouse, but this time we can continue further in. A green contraption traps us, but they are able to be destroyed after a few shots. This is a good example of showing the player the dangers of what happens if you hit one of these, warning us to be careful in the future. Our ghost accesses the chamber, and our objective becomes defeating the weakened Devoida ourselves. This is a mini-boss fight where some basic mechanics are introduced. Devoida has our own attack patterns, while lesser creatures spawn around to attack us from the side. We force Devoida to retreat and revive Shaw. This encounter was also way too easy, but I guess it can be forgiven as I consider it as part of the tutorial. We pick up the superconductor and skedaddle. We return to Shaw. He once again thanks us for saving him and wishes that we could have been here a day earlier. Nonetheless, he moves forward and informs us that he has informed Commander Zavala that we will be at the lost city with the superconductor. For his final gift, Shaw grants us Maeve's jump ship, allowing us to head into orbit as a brand new pilot. Before we leave though, there's another campaign mission to complete here by the name of Learning Light. We meditate and look at ourselves in a warped reality through a third-person point of view. It's here that we pick up our first aspect. These unlock fragment slots and our additional modifiers to our subclass abilities. The rest of this area forces us to use our abilities in order to clear and destroy these randomly and unexplained alien structures. Moving down these stairs, I encounter this spiky rotating arm clipping through the ceiling and walls. The area ahead has spiked lamp-like pendulums and more of the thorned rotary arms. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be looking at. This location looks ugly as all hell and is terrible in design. I don't have to interact with any of this garbage and just end up running past it. I don't know why this place exists in the state that it does or what its purpose even is. We find our way outside the warehouse and assembling with the wells of light out here in the Moth Yards. The fight goes on for quite a while, but there isn't ever enough mobs to threaten death. In fact, with all the light wells, this area is most likely just for us to get used to our abilities and ends with us earning our first fragment. These are smaller passives that end up influencing our build and gameplay even further. There's a lot of them and they can interact in many different ways, allowing for a wide variety of builds. Shaw grants us a rare set of Mythos Hack 4.1 armor, and that completes our activities in the Cosmodrome for now. By the way, it's only when I enter the quest director to look at the next step of the New Light quest that I realized how to actually claim completion of my bounties. We finally travel towards the tower and watch an introductory cutscene that establishes the grand scale of the last city. We only get to explore a small area, but the skybox and complex vistas allows the mind to engage in a healthy amount of imagination. We meet up with Amanda Holiday and learn that she's the chief shipwright at the tower. Due to the Drifter causing a large amount of Guardians to bring in contraband, it takes a while for us to get scanned and cleared. Anyways, being here as a tower was where I ended my first day of Destiny 2. Next day, I created a character, this time choosing the class of Warlock. I initially wanted to choose Warlock, but I picked up Hunter because, I already had a Warlock, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I don't need to explain the whole psychology of why I chose the random character, but I just chose a Warlock now, okay? That's it. We're done. Anyways, not completing any of the side quests or public events or exploring or reading anything reduced the time it took me to reach the tower by like 2 hours. So here we are at the tower again. The view from the tower is quite impressive indeed. We finally meet Commander Zavala, a Titan who welcomes us to the lost city and encourages us to meet the other denizens. We grab his gift from his office, a rifle from his personal collection, before continuing on. Ikora Ray is the Warlock Vanguard, and she does a little bit of everything around the tower. Both of their personalities are defined quite clearly in their dialogue, and specifically their flavor text. Zavala was direct with each of his words, while Ikora forces us to read a giant wall of text. I go through the ability list and pick up whatever I can. All of the fragments are locked to us for now. Ikora forces us to read through another wall of text. This one is a meditation about one of the times she studied under Osiris, and mainly focuses on this mysterious man building up his figure. We meditate at the spinning relic and finally unlock our new abilities. For now, I equip the Void Blink jump, but I still have access to the other jump options. It's odd that there's 3 different glide jump options, but whatever. Also, it's weird that Hunter has a triple jump, but Warlock doesn't. I mean, come on, give me that triple jump. We leave the bazaar and check in with the Drifter. Apparently, Cade 6, the tower's Hunter Vanguard, was killed a while back by a man named Uldren Sov, but no one is willing to take his place. Drifter is an interesting character, and he's interesting because he doesn't really have a character, at least not right now. The written text clues us in to his mischievous and trickster nature, and our ghost just tells us that he's unique, not giving us a lot to work on, but enough to clue us in into his character overall. Banshee 44 is the tower's resident gunsmith, and Master Rahul is the tower's chief crypto-archaeologist. With those introductions complete, we return to the commander and receive news that Nevada's location has been revealed. This takes us to the final step of the New Light campaign, for now, where we must complete the strike, The Disgraced. I queue up and enter the matchmaking before being thrown into the mission. Unfortunately, the strike had already started. Luckily, there wasn't too much progress made yet. The fallen raiding party isn't too happy about Nevoda's presence and blocks our way. Multiple waves of enemies descend from ships and we clear the threats as quick as possible. We enter another familiar location, but this time manage to breach the Jovian complex. It's pretty neat seeing how the designers reuse the different locations of this map to make each time we returned a little bit different and more exciting, while, saving on budgetary restraints. We encounter Nevoda and manage to push her back until we face her for real. This fight is basically the more realized version of our fight from when we rescued Shaw. The difficulty is much better as there are more enemies and they seem to do more damage, but that could just be the more enemies case. But to be honest, having 2 other people made the fight way too easy. With Nevoda defeated, Shaw wishes Cass and Maeve well while we head back to the tower. This initiates a cutscene where we learn that thanks to the Guardians like us, we have come to a greater understanding of the truth. The darkness is not what we first assumed, and much like the light, is a powerful tool of paracausal energy. We have learned to wield the darkness, just like how our enemies have learned to wield the light. Also, the Witness is a super bad guy. He's really, really bad, and you have to know how bad he is. Why is he bad? I don't know, he's just super bad. Nothing has changed at the tower, but I do find the Eververse store. And I gotta say, the Crowdcore emote for sale caught me off guard, no cap. This statue and tree is a nice tribute to Cade 6, I think. Hopefully. We speak with Zavala and learn that Ikora Ray has made progress to the superconductor analysis, and thus we go speak to her next. This somehow leads us to getting involved with the Drifter again. He introduces us to the Gambit game mode. This is a pretty interesting game mode because it's not just your typical PvP experience. Instead, they switch it up by making your squad fight against a bunch of mobs in a competition. After a certain amount of time, you can then invade the enemy camp and kill the opposing players in order to slow down their progress. I enjoyed this game mode quite a bit, but it's obvious that the main deciding factor of how your match will end is how much better you are at invading compared to your enemy team. I'll spare you from watching my mediocre gameplay, and instead I'll complain about how many matches you are forced to play. I'm okay with the game introducing you to these extra game modes, but forcing the player to play a bunch of matches in order to earn enough infamy slows down the progress of the New Light quest by too much in my opinion. Return to Ikora Ray, and she introduces us to the timeline reflection menu. This screen shows us the timeline of Destiny 2 events and its DLC in a simplified format. Seeing the timeline and getting caught up is a nice touch, but I can't help but feel like this page is missing way too much information. I understand wanting to keep it simple for new players, but it's too simple. I barely know any of the names and characters, and I think having an additional pop-up to highlight all of the main players would help in understanding the story and its events a little bit more. Anyways, the next step in the New Light quest is to now find Devrim K in the European Dead Zone. Devrim K is infinitely less important than Shaw. He just exists as a quest NPC for our purposes, and talking to him lets us know that we need to kill some Fallen in order to collect some map data. We turn that into K and can continue on with our quest. Back in the Cosmodrome, we kill some Dusk mechanics in order to lure out some Dusk captains and take them out as well. With them dead, we obtain the information we need in order to find the hidden gate. This takes us to the end of the initial tutorial area, where we have to clear a part of it in reverse order this time around. And I have to admit, I lied earlier. This section is actually where I had the most issues with the quest tracker because it just straight up failed to update. It's only now that I'm writing this script that I searched up the quest and can indeed confirm that this is a bug. Encountering this bug aside, all we've done so far is shoot at creatures, larger creatures, and other players, so utilizing a different skill set was not a bad change of pace. Switching the gameplay up from just shooting stuff to a jumping puzzle, alongside having to actually use my eyes and look at the environment in order to make progress, was a nice change of pace. Kept on coping on blink jumps, but was finally forced to change it because some of these jumps are just not possible with it, regardless of my skill level. It feels like blink jumping should keep your movement's acceleration, but instead I think we're just forced to move a static distance. That makes it feel a lot than it realistically should be, because in theory this jump style is real. I switched to a Solar Warlock later, and they have a dash alongside their jump. I think making the blink a movement ability like the dash instead of just replacing your jump would fix my issues without having to change how the skill works. I solved the jumping puzzle and successfully recover our first exotic. How exciting! I'm not going to talk about the Risk Runner as an exotic because what could I possibly have to say about it? Fine, I guess I am making this video, so I have to say something. And that something that I can say is that as soon as I saw the fire rate and started to shoot the gun, it felt pretty good. I was still a Void Warlock and this was an arc weapon, so I didn't get to maximize its exotic trait benefits. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if the best guns in this game are SMGs. Most of the enemies die in a few shots, and being able to shoot more bullets faster makes balancing other weapons infinitely more tricky in comparison. We return to Commander Zavala and complete our quest. That's where I ended day 2 of my journey. Day 3 started with me logging in and panicking to hit the record button as I'm immediately hit by a cutscene. The witness contacted us through our ghost and offered us salvation. We refused as we didn't know its true intentions and are ideologically opposed to its attack on the traveler. Savathun, the hive goddess of trickery, managed to disguise herself as one of our foremost guardians, Osiris. This allowed her to gain access to our secrets, but Osiris was able to do the same to her. Apparently, Savathun was rebelling against the witness herself and hid away our chance of victory on Neptune, for some reason. The former Cabal captain, Callus, decided not to fight the witness and joined up with them instead. But in a crazy plot twist, Callus's daughter, Empress Kaedul and Mithrax, the Alinsky leader of the House of Light, became our allies instead. In an unprecedented move, the Traveler left Earth to confront the witness head-on. The cutscene visuals were nice, but all of this is just sci-fi gobbledygook to me. It feels epic at the very least though. The witness is constantly hitting the fattest rips I've ever seen in my entire life as he just walks towards something in a menacing manner. The Traveler shoots out a giant beam of light towards the witness, but this only seems to create a pathway for them instead. The visuals here are crazy, but one minor nitpick I have is that the witness's smoking head isn't animated as it walks into the beam and it looks a little silly. The whole crew looks upon the scene and marvel. The witness simply waves a finger and slices the TIE fighters into many slices, and Amanda ends up smashing her ship into one of the floating pieces of rubble. She's most likely dead, but since we don't see her body, it doesn't count. The witness then reaches out towards the Traveler and witnesses some visions. This causes him to reach out to his disciple, reminding him of what must be done. Osiris lets us know that they have found the veil, and that ends the cutscene. We are thrown into the fray and must assist Osiris in finding the veil. This was another pretty epic cutscene, but it is beyond annoying to load up the game, select my character, and then get thrust into a completely separate activity than the one I was previously engaged in. It's a good thing that I finished the Risk Runner quest last night and just have to farm more solar kills for the New Light quest. Our ghost checks in on our location and we're pretty close to Neptune, as we are in its orbit. Osiris clues us in, and we figure out that the Veil is some important MacGuffin. This location isn't all that interesting, but we still shoot a lot of bad guys before anything else can happen. Our ghost questions if following Osiris was the right choice, or if we should have stayed behind to fight the Witness. Osiris reassures us in our mission because none of us can face the Witness head-on. We can only try to prevent it from connecting with the Veil in order to help out the Traveler and to then survive this cataclysmic event. Some creature with a sight, born from the unholy alliance between Witness and Callus, named Kavost, Reverend of the Witness, blinks into existence and attacks us. I fight back with my sword at first, but it grabs me and drains me to 1 HP before backing out. I wish we were given more of a reason for why this creature attacks us before backing up, but overall this is a pretty effective use case of showing the player how dangerous an enemy is and how to fight against it without just telling us directly. From this encounter, I know to keep my distance at all costs so it just doesn't suck me dry. We kill some more baddies and destroy the ship's computer core in order to slow down the assault. Our next goal is to meet up with Osiris and get to Neptune's surface. This takes us to a super cool set piece where we are in space and have to jump across a bunch of floating rubble. The realized scale here is quite impressive, but with nothing moving at all, it feels a little bit lifeless and still. This massive ship flying by halfway through, along with some enemies finally showing up, this is where we re-encounter Kavost and have to face him properly. This is the first difficult encounter I've had in this game, and that's because it actually forces you to kite and position yourself properly. While the fight was a nice change of pace, I think there needed to be more trash mobs in this fight. I was pretty lazy when it came to tethering myself to Kavost and got way too close too many times. I really should have been punished, but I think it's fine for our first encounter with this type of new enemy. We reach the escape pod and enter it. I expected some sort of transition as we descend to the planet, but we just end up fading to black. It's fine, but ending on a black loading screen just feels really anticlimactic considering the events that just occurred, and kind of removes a bit of the tension that was built up. Now in Amisa Park and Neomuna, we have to go find Osiris. Our ghost is shocked that civilization exists here on Neptune, and since I don't know any of the lore, I don't know exactly how to infer the statement. My initial impressions of the Destiny universe made it seem like most of the system was fairly populated due to advanced space travel, but apparently some people living in Neptune shocks our ghost, so Some inhabitants named Rohan and Nimbus contact us, wishing to know if we were invaders, but we confirm our alliance instead. Somehow they know about our existence as Lightbearers, but we didn't know about them. We fight a bunch of enemies, but I want to talk about the design aesthetic of this location. I do remember the marketing being super vibrant with neon lights heavily inspired by the 80s, but at least in this area, I don't think it translated well. Instead of being bright and vibrant, all the colors and design stylings have been toned down by way too much. Sure, some of the buildings are pink-ish, and there are some blue trees or whatever, but they really should have committed harder to the neon aesthetic. There's some wacky looking buildings, but it's just generic looking round towers, and that's not really all that exciting. Minor complaints about the aesthetics aside, this location is not that bad. The giant statue dude shooting out enemies just being in the distance really adds to the sense of scale, and that is really something the game has delivered on. Having made contact with Osiris, we first investigate an anomaly. This gives us access to a superpowered strand subclass where all of the cooldowns are reduced. This section is nice since it gives us a taste of the power we could wield and changes up the gameplay with brand new abilities. The best one by far is the fact that you can use a grappling hook. This is a Giga-based design decision, and just flying around is quite enjoyable. We enter a cutscene and are introduced to Rohan and Nimbus as they fly around on hoverboards. Osiris is saved, but his focus is completely on the Veil, while Rohan wants to meet up at the Watchtower. Rohan says that he understands what's at stake far better than us, and ends by saying how not all of us have lives to spare. This is obviously referring to the fact that ghosts can revive us, but I would debate the notion that it counts as a separate life. Our ghost can still be destroyed, and if it is, then we die, so the true life is attached to the ghost, and we still only have one of those. I'm only really talking about this because Osiris shakes his head solemnly like it was an epic own, but if I can logic this out, then surely he would be able to come back to this statement with ease. Another cutscene plays. The Cabal dude, who I think is a disciple, walks out of a rectangle, and he has some ridiculous pauldrons that look epic, but make less sense the more you think about them. He takes out a chalice since this occasion calls for a toast, but his minions just ignore him, and that's it. I think this was supposed to be a joke, but the previous scene's tone, along with what we are looking at, doesn't really aid in its comedic potential. Sure, we got the punchline, but we didn't really get the setup. The witness contacts the Urukai and confirms that this is indeed the disciple. They ask for a progress update, and the disciple confirms that they will soon have the veil. And that's it. This cutscene was the most useless cutscene of all time, if I'm being honest. The witness got no character development, the disciple got no character development. If we at least learned what the veil was, then you could justify the scene, but nope, nothing happens. In a slightly more positive note though, I can hear the writers cackling every time they have the disciples refer to the witness as my witness. Good attention to detail. I understand that part of this confusion is being a new player, but if you're going to let a new player access late-stage story content, you have to be aware that they lack critical information. Back in control of our character, we talk to Nimbus for more information. We learn that he is a Cloud Strider, which is basically just another name for a space magic user. They keep the city safe and will do anything to keep the veil safe. And, I have to admit, it is astounding that I still do not know what the veil is. Sure, we know it's an artifact, but that could literally mean anything. I'm assuming it's some sort of weapon, but it's really weird that I have to guess what it is when everyone already knows what it is. Although, to be fair, there is a high chance that the veil was introduced in the story previously. Being a new player in this location just makes me have no context on what it is, and it being the most important item of all time just adds to this confusion. That's the end of the free-to-play section for the Lightfall DLC. It's pretty neat that you get to play the first mission of the expansions for free. Wizard 101 could take a few notes. Anyways, I took a break after this, and you will not believe what happens when I log back into my character. That's right, another fucking cutscene. Some lady tells us about the Dreaming City, an awoken stronghold beyond the reach of any outsider, and that this was her wish granted to her by Riven, the last Ahamkara who only bargained with her. Sure. But boom, the city was invaded not once, but twice. First by the Taken King and the second by the Witch Queen. Riven ended up granting them wishes as well, and with her dying breath granted a wish that laid a curse upon the Dreaming City. Savathun was the hive goddess of trickery or whatever, and in secret she inscribed her true wish on the wall that governed the terms of Riven's pact with the narrator lady. It was a wish to pursue the witness as only Riven can open the way. Apparently it was us guardians who tore open her heart, but this lady along with her wizards are summoning Riven's spirit to make Savathun's final wish and hear Riven's final price. Once again, I find myself understanding the events of what have happened, but lack any of the details or motivations of the characters. I'm sure it will make more sense as time goes on, but for now, I'm more lost than the writers have lost. The lighting and visual design of the staircase is quite beautiful, and I was stuck here trying to take a nice screenshot for quite a while. Moving forwards requires us to clear some enemies. One of the evil factions are attacking, and the trash mobs this time around are goblins and hobgoblins. The large armored enemies are called minotaurs. It's cute that they made these futuristic mechanical loaders have the names of actual fleshy fantasy creatures. This room with black energy spheres and such is another nice looking location. After killing like 200 goblins and taking down the wyvern, we have succeeded. This is my Rich Evans moment, I'm keeping this in preventing them from disturbing this ritual. Apparently we have Riven's tooth, probably from our previous season, and place it where it belongs. Our deep sight, which apparently is just a power we have, will reveal Savathun's wish, and with it, we can finally pursue the witness. Before walking up to the wall, you know I gotta play some good shot first. There's a snake, dragon, bird, and bird 2 on the wall, and shooting them changes the symbol. With our wish requested, Queen Marasov summons Riven. Riven awakens and responds in a rather casual manner as she refers to her death as such a long slumber. It's kinda like she's annoyed. Anyways, she refuses to grant our wish. Probably because she's just as confused as us as to how we've summoned her Force Ghost. Space magic. The following cutscene is, no cap, pretty epic. I finally put a face to Queen Marasov and Riven's spirit climbs out of the portal. I only saw the brief picture of Riven from the earlier black and white cutscene, so when Riven crawled out as a massive white alien tentacle space rhino, I was caught off guard beyond belief. Riven actually answers Marasov and says that she has no reason to refuse granting of the wish, and instead needs a reason to grant it. She clearly harbors ill will towards us guardians for killing her, her kind, and her eggs. And yeah, that would indeed cause some ire. Riven was smart enough to hide away some eggs at the very least. Mara gets all uppity at Riven's request as she mentions how the Amakara will live to terrorize us once more, but accepts nonetheless. We arrive at the hub for emergency logistics and maneuvers, and this acts as their central ship location. We don't have much of anything to do here for now, but looking outside reveals quite the fascinating view into the Traveler itself. I always thought the Traveler was some sort of magic Dyson sphere, but it looks less mechanical than I expected, so it might actually just be some sort of alien creature. Also, the Witness has a whole theme going on with triangles, while the Traveler is a circle. Quite interesting, huh? I know that triangles are vital for structural support when designing beams and bridges and buildings. More metaphorically, we could look at this from a different angle as well. For example, the Holy Trinity is a triangle. The Witness is God, the Veil is the Holy Spirit, and the Witness is Jesus. I mean, it kinda lines up as long as you ignore every other fact. Pyramids are also basically three-dimensional triangles. And to form a pyramid, you have your base, and start building on top of that base, and create several layers which converge into a point. The Witness is apparently a being made up of other creatures, so he's basically a pyramid himself. Circles, on the other hand, are made out of infinite points, which are equidistant from the center. Also, due to how gravity works, objects compress themselves into spheres, much like the Traveler. So perhaps the final shape is the Traveler itself. There's obviously some sort of symbolism going on here with circles and triangles. I'm just not sure what it's supposed to all represent or mean just yet. It's also now, while writing this, that I'm finding out that the US version of the word Traveler only uses one L, while the UK spelling has two L's. Among the many other topics of discussion, let me know your feelings about these differences as well. Anyways, all of this was a nice side distraction from what the New Light quest wanted us to do, so we shall return to that. Anyways, I opened the game up the next day, and you will not believe what happened next. That's right, no cutscene. Just some banners letting us know about some of the variety of activities that are now available to us. Oh, and a reminder to buy the newest DLC, but to be fair, this is only the second time I remember seeing this pop up, which is a lot more restrained than I thought they would be. Using the Risk Runner instead of a solar weapon slowed down the New Light quest progress, so I had to complete a bunch of public events in order to rack up enough solar kills to make some progress. With this quest done, we returned to Ikora Ray and finally obtained the Spark subclasses. I have to reiterate this, but I appreciate the flavor text in this game so much. It's even implemented into the subclasses, and that just helps sell the fantasy more while making the world feel alive. Our next goal is to complete a bunch of Crucible matches. The Crucible is the standard PvP game mode in Destiny 2 and consists of a bunch of smaller game modes within it. Crucible Control is basically capture the flag, Crucible Clash is TDM, and blah 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 blah. You get the point. These matches all went way worse than my previous Gambit games. Lacking map knowledge and not having the appropriate weapons, and not even having a proper build, really does not help when it comes to getting kills. After playing Crucible for 90 minutes, I accrue enough points to rank up and make progress in the New Light quest. In order to understand where we are today, Ikora Ray tells us the story of Cade 6, his importance to the denizens of the tower, and his final mission where he died. Well, I say tell, but in a smart decision, this is actually a mission where we flashback and join Cade 6 as he prevents a breakout at the Prison of Elders. This mission is probably the best content I've experienced thus far. Cade 6 being an actual character and fighting alongside you just adds so much to the experience. It really showcases Cade's personality, and even though we barely know him, the mission still manages to appeal to your emotions through all of the giant set pieces. The biggest flaw I have with this mission though, is that when watching the cutscenes, I'm completely lost at how power scaling in this universe works. Like, how strong are we compared to other people or other bad guys? I just don't know, and that makes it way too confusing. Cade manages to take care of most of the threats, but of course he gets third-partied by some rat. The figure asks for any lost words, and Cade responds with, "How's your sister?" Initially, this came off like an epic burn, and while it still is, when Ikora Ray starts to explain the aftermath, the story becomes much more complex. This wasn't some random bozo, but was Uldren Sov, the brother of Mara Sov, Queen of the Awoken. While Uldren was taken care of, he was resurrected by a ghost and lost all of his memories, becoming an agent by the name of Crow. And this has to have a lot of in-universe implications, right? If you die, can another ghost just revive you? Did he even have a ghost? I don't know. I'm just lost, dude. It's crazy. It's wild. It's pretty epic though. No cap. At first, the Vanguard wanted to hide Crow's past life from him, but people can change and he is no longer who he once was. That's cool and all, but are we just going to ignore the Morozov connection? Why did her brother just kill Cade when it seems like we're allies? It could be that we're just temporary allies because of the witness, but when creating our character, we could choose to be an Awoken, and thus, that makes me feel like we're just generically good. This was indeed quite an interesting turn of events and leaves a lot of questions unanswered, and I gotta say, this hook works incredibly well for me. Our next timeline reflection quest is Crux of Stasis. In order to avert a catastrophic future, the Exostranger taught Guardians how to use and harness the darkness without losing themselves. That summary is pretty much all you need. Timeline Mission 3, Lucent Hive, is a mission where we learn about the Witch Queen, Savathun, re-emerging with the power of light. Just like we, Lightbearers, accepted the power of darkness, she, a user of darkness, could also see the light. I don't have much to say about this mission, except for the fact that this is one of the most beautiful and striking locations I've seen in both Destiny 2 and gaming in general. The white marbled gothic architecture with red accents is actually Kino. Oh, and the fact that Savathun gained the power of the light from the Traveler itself is an actually wild plot twist, but all of it seems to be in service of stopping the witness. It's interesting that right now, in the season of the Wish, we're using Savathun's final wish as our wish. She's a hive god of cunning, so she has to be up to something with her wish, right? I don't know, but some Destiny lore nerds can probably guess at what might happen next, and I'm not quite there yet. Next up in the new light quest is to complete a bunch of Vanguard strikes. I thought these were the raids at first, but actually these are just mini raids and act as a nice middle ground for getting your toes wet in a more difficult environment. The normal difficulty of the strike was still fairly easy, but in the last phase when fighting the boss, I could tell that I should at least take a look at the different abilities and fragments I have for my classes. I switched over from my Void subclass to Stormcaller, which is the Arc subclass, to mix things up, and picked up a few fragments that I thought were synergistic. Spark of Haste is a defensive fragment that boosts stats and will let me get in and out of encounters faster as it's just free bonuses while sprinting. Spark of Focus reduces recovery by 10, but while sprinting for a short time, our class ability regeneration is increased. Spark of Volts gives us 10 recovery, which negates the previous fragment's downside, and if we use a finisher on an enemy, we become amplified. Now, we need a bonus while amplified, and thus I picked up the Spark of Amplitude, as rapidly defeating targets while in an amplified state creates an orb of power. So, with this, we have two small engines with 2 fragments each that are fairly synergistic with each other. No idea how good this is compared to anything else, or if it scales well into higher level content, but the gameplay style of running and gunning is pretty fun. Especially since being amplified increases your movement speed, you can start zooming all over the map. It's honestly pretty great and is a massive change in direction of how the gameplay was before. After completing enough Vanguard bounties, we can move on to step 3 of the On the Offensive quest. And because you're watching this video, you obviously have 300 IQ and have most likely realized that this video is almost over. That's because step 3 requires you to defeat any boss in the Nightfall playlist. Now, the problem is that in order to access the Nightfall playlist, you have to have the Lightfall DLC. Thus, as a free-to-play player, you cannot complete the new light quest, and I believe this is a major mistake. I'm okay with the fact that you have to have the Lightfall DLC in order to access the Nightfall playlist, but at the very least, there should be a free-to-play Nightfall mission that you can complete in order to complete this new light quest. Now, technically, there is still more content available for us to complete, but I don't really feel like doing only the intro missions to the DLCs, especially since I did manage to pick up the Story So Far Humble Bundle after this. With all of the DLC, I don't need to do only their introductory missions since I'm gonna do the entire mission itself. So you better like and subscribe for more videos in the future. 27 video files took up 1.5 terabytes of my storage. What does that have to do with my final thoughts? Nothing, but I had to include this fact somewhere, so there you go. Now, for the pros. The gunplay is indeed as good as everyone says it is. A lot of cool looking guns are included as well. And not even just guns, there's also bows, glaives, there we go. I was trying to think forever what it was. I don't know why I just didn't write this down, but glaives are also pretty cool. Swords, there's a lot of unique weapons. The use of lighting in this game is also incredible and makes me bust a nut no cap, on a stack, for real. The cutscenes in this game are bonkers in their quality. The set pieces and maps are also really good. Every area felt pretty unique, and there were a lot of interesting locations within them. The story and lore have also managed to hook me in with all of the complex layers that have been introduced. I want to know what the witness is, what's going on, and can't wait to get inside the Traveler. Sci-fi and space stuff are inherently intriguing to me, so that's obviously a plus. Everything I went over was free, and there's still some strikes and missions I haven't completed quite yet. I wouldn't call it free to play though, more free to try, as large swaths of content are still locked off behind a paywall. Without a bundle, or being on discount, the DLC is pretty expensive by itself. However, I did manage to get all the DLCs through a Humble Bundle deal that is no longer available. However, at the time I am recording and releasing this video, the DLCs are on sale on Steam, heavily discounted if you're interested. Surprisingly enough, at least for this new player experience, I didn't have that many cons. I didn't talk about it, but the Sunset content of the Red War that I paid for many years ago just isn't in the game anymore, and that is kinda crazy. Having the timeline reflection missions as a replacement is an okay solution to a problem that shouldn't even exist. Every mission was also too easy, and the difficulty needs to be turned up. I don't think I was actually challenged outside of 2 fights, and one of them was a fight against a jumping puzzle where the quest tracker was bugged. I'm okay with the base level of missions being on the easier side, but I wish there was an option to turn it up like you can on the strikes. I'm tying lackluster progression into the low difficulty option as well. Every gun kills every mob fast enough that it didn't really matter what gun I used. Also, commons and rares might as well not exist because I got equipped with a full loadout of legendary weapons and equipment fairly quickly. And that's pretty much it. I guess I have some minor complaints, but nothing important enough to add here. You watched the video, you know my thoughts on most of the sections, and if you didn't, at least you now have plenty of reason to do so. I demand that you like this video and then subscribe to my channel, for the sequel to this video will be out in a bit. In fact, I have a lot more than just one more Destiny 2 video in the works because this is a long game with a lot of content. Good night, and don't let the loot bug bite.